We have a Yelan rerun incoming, and naturally the big question is, should you get her? Now, I actually still play with Yelan a fair bit, and I do actually like using her because I think she's actually pretty strong. But there have been some reasons why I'm not immediately saying, yes, you should get her. And the reasons are as such. There is a rumor that we're getting a Furina rerun in the next patch, and if that ends up being the case, then that would actually be reason number one for not getting Yelan. Otherwise, if we have a look at the lunar reactions that currently exist in Nod-Krai, they seem to be leading exclusively on EM and crit and actively avoiding damage percent. So if that continues to be a pattern, then one of the big parts of Yelan's kit is going to end up being less and less valuable. And then finally, there's also Columbina. If she ends up being playable, I get the feeling she's also going to be another character competing for Yelan's role. But at the same time, very suspicious leaks seem to be suggesting that Columbina is going to be an on-field Hydro DPS in much the same way that Mawika is an on-field Pyro DPS, so we'll just have to see. At the end of the day, look, if your Primogems are tight or if you don't have unlimited resources because you're not filthy rich, Yelan, to me, doesn't seem like the safest pull right now. Unless, of course, you like her a lot, especially now that she also has a new outfit from version 5.8. My opinion on this particular topic shifted quite a fair bit after realizing it was a lot easier to maximize or at least almost maximize Furina's fanfare stacks with even someone like Shinobu or C1 Lauma, which does mean that someone like Furina ends up being even more flexible, which kind of steps on the toes of someone like Yelan, who I had traditionally thought as being the perfect alternative for the various teams where I would not have been able to run Furina. When it comes to the other Hydro off-field options against Yelan, well, we have someone like Xingqiu, who is basically defensive Yelan, but with all the other defensive options that we have in the game, shielders, Dahaya, healers, yeah, I've kind of benched Xingqiu at this point. Mona, Kokomi, Ayato, and Aino, these characters have some limited uptime problems and circular impact. Barbara and C6 Candice are particularly niche, but I will say that C6 Candice is a little bit better than people may be giving her credit for, not just for like Alakino teams, but also for Yao Yao in Nilou teams as well. Speaking of Nilou, there's also Nilou. Technically, she does also have off-field Hydro app, but she's basically her own archetype, so she doesn't really count. And then finally, there's Sigewinne, who kind of has slower Hydro apps, so it's not amazing. And so I wouldn't really rely on her for that, at least as far as I know. I don't have Sigewinne, so let me know in the comments if you disagree with that vehemently. The main competitor for Yelan at the moment obviously remains to be Furina, and so when you compare Yelan and Furina, Yelan has higher personal damage and faster Hydro app. Furina, on the other hand, buffs the entire team whilst having Hydro app that doesn't require a specific trigger to activate. And because of that, their DPS, their personal DPS, kind of ends up being the same, because Yelan's buff doesn't buff herself when she's off-field. With a healer, they're basically equal in teams with like Navia or Vape Alakino, the Alhaitham Lauma variant, or even Skirk. With non-normal attack DPS characters, for example, Tegnari, Neuvillette, Dahaya, or potentially even triple DPS comps like Quick Bloom, Furina is a lot better than Yelan. If, of course, you're playing a team without a healer, then obviously you don't really want to be using someone like Furina at all, because she's going to drain the team's HP, which is going to leave you in a very precarious predicament. And then there's also something about Furina's kit that doesn't really like the idea of the entire team stuck at half health, so Yelan does end up being a lot better in those teams as well. Right now, my Lunar Charged team is probably one of the main places where I would be playing Yelan, but even then, apparently Aino is going to start contesting her for that particular slot, especially Constellated Aino. The spreadsheet impact players have somehow figured out that I think C6 Aino, with barely any investment in her own personal damage, will still outperform Yelan on a team DPS perspective for some of those Lunar Charge and even Lunar Bloom teams coming in the future. This might actually be more of an indication that Columbina is going to end up outperforming Yelan just straight up in those kinds of Lunar teams. We'll just have to see. So overall, look, I still like Yelan, and I still play with her, but in most of the teams that I play with Yelan, I do kind of prefer playing Furina, or rather I could also just use Furina anyway, and on top of that, you know, future shenanigans are not really favoring Yelan, at least by my feeling alone. Yelan does work really well as a strong alternative, so if you're trying to, you know, get some more characters to fill in your teams for Stygian Onslaught, Spiral Abyss, hell, even Imaginarium Theater, then I suppose that's a pretty decent reason as well, but that whole, you know, limited resources, limited Primogems fiasco, that's kind of going to be a big preventative measure against most players potentially choosing to get Yelan over someone else like Furina, Columbina, etc. Now, quick reminder before we continue with the rest of this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And if you ring the bell, you can be notified of the latest content on the channel. There's also this function of hyping the video, which seems to help really well with the algorithm. So if you could do that for me, that would be amazing. Speaking of teams, let's have a quick look at what's new since Yelan's last rerun. And here's a surprise. Did you know that her last rerun was actually in version 4.8? Basically, throughout the entirety of the Natlan cycle, we actually never saw her return. It didn't even occur to me that this was the case, but this is actually the case. So, of all the characters since Natlan dropped, let's have a look at the ones that matter. Kinich can actually use her in his Burgeon teams. Xilanen is a great support for her own DPS. G2 Xilanen is also someone who can greatly buff her damage with that HP buff, so that's really, really good. Autoron and Aoife can use her in their Electro Charge comps, but her damage percent buff isn't all that important as far as I understand. I don't know how useful Hydro is in a Chaska comp. Obviously, the damage buff from Yelan's ult is going to be useful, but Chaska's general damage is counted as a charge attack, so you're not going to be getting that off-field Hydro from Yelan directly. You will, of course, be getting some Hydro damage from Chaska instead. Mawika can play with Yelan, but you do need to weave in some normal attacks as opposed to just straight up donutting with Furina on the team. PMC is a normal attack DPS in the grand scheme of things, so they actually work pretty well with Yelan. There are Skirk teams with and without Escoffier that can use Yelan, but if you do have Escoffier, you would rather bring Furina instead because Escoffier happens to do quite a lot of damage. Like I mentioned, Lunar Charged teams without a healer would prefer Yelan, but if it's going to be something like Flynn's and a Nefer together, from my understanding, Constellated Aino ends up being stronger, and some Llama teams would also prefer Yelan, but if you happen to have someone like C1 Llama, she does seem to be enough healing for Furina variants as well, so you kind of just have to figure it out from there. So if anything, throughout the Natlan cycle, the two teams that I personally have found renewed interest in Yelan over are, of course, my Skirk team, because I don't have Escoffier, and my Lunar Charge team, especially because I don't really have all that interest in getting Flynn's. Also, I just want to do some quick commentary on Nefer. If you're not interested in Nefer leaks and all that jazz, then, you know, just find the next chapter and go from there. You ready? Here we go. Apparently, Nefer Llama teams are going to be like Flynn's and Nefer teams, where you'd rather have Constellated Aino over Yelan. That's it. That's the extent of my Nefer commentary. Building Yelan seems to remain more or less the same. When it comes to her weapon options, Aqua Simulacra being her signature remains her best in slot. Chaska's signature, Astral Vulture's Crimson Plumage, I believe, being of course a newer weapon option, it's still definitely worse. Listen, you actually get 22% less crit damage in favor of more base attack, but that's worthless on Yelan. And on top of that, you do, however, get 4 more damage percent for her ult if the team has 2 non-Hydro characters. I simply do not see a scenario where you can make up the damage difference by losing 22% crit damage with 4% more damage percent on that ult. That's just not happening. So if anything, I'll just echo what the TCers tend to say. Just stick with Favs if you're not using Aqua. That being said, I do just want to mention Snare Hook, which is the new Nod-Krai craftable bow. If you are playing a Lunar Charge team with, let's say, Flynn's but no Nefer, there's a good to fair chance that Yelan will be the second character contributing to the Lunar Charge procs, in which case the extra EM that you get on something like Snare Hook can in fact be useful. If it's a Flynn's and Nefer team, you'll have Ascendant Gleam for even more EM on Yelan. So in that particular scenario, if you don't build your Nefer for DPS, which is not what I've done, and you've just gone all in on attack and ER, then yes, Snare Hook could probably be the perfectly fine free-to-play option for Yelan in a team like this. But for most Yelan players, I'd probably still stick with Aqua or Favj for that matter. There is the event bow from version 5.6 called Something of Solitude, but it's a meme weapon. That's kind of why I forgot the name off by heart. So yeah, I wouldn't really bother with that either. For artifact sets, just stick with EoSF. If there's a team where you don't care about Yelan's personal damage for whatever reason, first question I want to ask you is why aren't you just using Xingqiu instead? If you're playing in a Nilou team with Yelan, then I guess you could also use Flop or Gilded Dreams. But again, why not just use Xingqiu? He's kind of better in that regard. Flynn's and Nefer teams, and even Nefer Lama teams could definitely use the new Serenade set on Yelan. I suppose if you're going to do a Flynn's Aino team, then you could also run Serenade on Yelan, but at the same time, why not just use Serenade on Aino and build a DPS build on Yelan and just move on from there? For the C6 Yelan enjoyers, 2-piece HP, 2-piece HP Hydro is pretty much the way to go if you're trying to maximize her personal damage, and I'm basing that off the Akasha leaderboards. When it comes to artifact substats, assuming you're playing an EoSF build, honestly, I just stick with ER, Hydro, HP, or Crit. Based on what I've seen, seems to me that if your HP cup has better substats compared to your Hydro cup, then your HP cup is actually going to be a bit better. So based on that, it seems to me that in the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't really be fretting too hard about getting one specific main stat cup over the other, so long as the substats are very, very nice. And of course, the substats that you're looking for are ER, HP, and Crit. EM is also potentially a useful substat for those Lunar Charged teams, and also if you know for a fact that you can forward vape that skill, for example. Otherwise, you do also have Sucrose for those Lunar Charged teams in particular, so she's already getting a fair bit of EM. I wouldn't really go out of my way to get any more. If you can only fit Yelan's skill in once per rotation, you're going to need a ton of ER, so I don't really recommend those teams with her. But if you have C1, or if you're able to fit in her skill twice per rotation on that 10-second cooldown, then a little bit over 200% ER is apparently ideal. I personally run quite a fair bit of ER on her, somewhere between the 220 and 240% ER, depending on which cup I'm using, so she does end up feeling a lot smoother to play with that extra ER, even if it's a little bit overkill. And then, of course, for the people who are playing Mono Hydro, for example, yeah, you're not going to need all that ER, but I don't know if anyone really plays Mono Hydro these days. Let me know in the comments if you're still a fan of that. Speaking of Constellations, let's just remind ourselves of what Yelan's Constellations are. C1 means you don't have to force your rotations to fit two skills. You can actually front-load that energy regeneration, and listen, I have played with some viewers C0 Yelans, and after being so used to my C1 Yelan, which by the way I got in 110 pull, haha, I highly recommend C1 Yelan for quality of life purposes. But if you can't afford to get C1 Yelan, don't force yourself to try and get C1 Yelan, okay? But I'm just telling you, from my personal experience, it's a lot better than people give it credit for. C2 is more damage and Hydro App. Now here's the thing, occasionally Yelan's Hydro App can end up synchronizing with an off-fielder's Pyro App in such a way that I can't seem to get a Hydro Aura on the target because I'm still doing normal attacks with, let's say, Arlecchino's Pyro-infused normal attacks. So C2 can sort of help in preventing that. I don't think it's necessary to go out of your way to get C2 though, but I suppose if you're desperate for, let's say, Aino Constellations, this would not be the worst thing to accidentally collect on the way. C3 is ult levels, C5 is skill levels. In my opinion, both are useful because the skill can also do some nice serotonin damage, but, you know, from a DPS perspective, C5 is probably a little bit more on the worthless side. C4 is, I think, one of two existing HP increased constellations. The other, of course, being C2 Shillidan for Hydro characters. And then we have C6, which is just basically a quick string of massive damage after popping her ult. So that's the dealio with Yelan. She's still useful, and I will probably keep playing with her from time to time, but you know, as time is progressing in Nod-Krai, we'll just have to see if she still ends up being that kind of valuable character for a lot of the newer characters, as well as potentially some new teams featuring older characters. We'll just have to see. Especially when there are these characters showing up who are probably going to be more fun without necessarily being normal attack spammers. Well, yeah, that's kind of going to drive down the value of someone like Yelan. Let me know if you've got all of this in the comments below. How do you feel about Yelan, and are you going to get her if you don't already have her, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed this. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.